It's Sunday, October 19th, and I'd like to talk about a, a topic that's dear to my heart, actually. But in connection with, a major phenomenon that's going on, which is the so-called ICE forces, which is the customs, immigration and customs enforcement people. And that's extremely controversial because, on the one hand, the proponents of them, their supporters say we've got all these immigrants, they're causing all kinds of problems, and we need to really do something about that. So they've been going around the country, hurting people and kicking them out. It's some people think it's necessary, and other people see it as a tremendous um, affront to civil liberties, which I more or less agree with. I think if there is an immigration problem, there's other ways to deal with it. And one of the things about immigration is, especially, Trump complains about immigration, but he wants to start a war in Venezuela um, because Venezuela is ostensibly importing drugs into the United States. But the real reason is because the United States is broke and it's looking for assets to steal. And Venezuela is a kind of low-hanging fruit. It doesn't have a super powerful military, but it has a lot of oil. And if we can overthrow the government there and get control of it, then that'll be, as people like John Bolton said, that'll be great for us. As if the people of Venezuela, they're expendable. We're the indispensable country, and they're dispensable. So, we cause chaos in a country, and then the people leave in droves to escape. And where are they going to go? They're going to go to the United States, and then we complain about immigration. So the whole thing is just so it's so self-defeating, and you really have to wonder, what are these people thinking? But there's another. But what I want to get to here is that ICE and many of the other problems that we have in our country are the result of another form of ICE, which I describe as the lack of introspection, critical thinking, and empathy. So these are psychological aspects of our thought processes that are severely lacking in American culture. It's easy to go out, create a bunch of refugees. They come into the United States, and then we say we have an immigration problem. And they don't, but what was the purpose of has anybody examined why we have this immigration problem? And I would submit to you that if we did some more introspection as a country, more critical thinking as a country, and more empathy as a people, we wouldn't have these problems. So what are these three aspects? Introspection is the ability to look at oneself and say, ask the question, what am I doing? When Jesus was on the cross, he said, Lord, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. So, and oftentimes when the U.S. does foreign policy or any kind of policy, they don't ask, what am I doing? What are my motivations? Am I doing this from a place of sincerity, or am I doing it as just a selfish person? And does it really help? So that's an example of introspection, where you're looking at your own motivations, your own ideas, and trying to make sense of them, so that when you do act, you act with more consideration. The second aspect is what I call critical thinking. Critical thinking is the ability to look at a phenomenon and ask questions about it, and then formulate a deeper understanding of what is actually going on. So when an example of that is let's take the No Kings the No Kings protests. So people are saying, yeah, we don't want kings, I get that, but the issue is what is behind this idea of no kings. And it turns out if you do some research on it, you find out that it is heavily influenced by the Democratic Party. And I would submit to you that the purpose of the No Kings movement is a partisan corralling of popular sentiment, and which is justifiably has problems with the Trump administration, but they're doing it from the point of view of how do we get control back from the Trump administration into the hands of the Democratic Party. The other aspect of it is that I was listening to a reporter earlier today who was covering this demonstration named Dan Shore, I believe it is. He was in New York, and he said that there was no discussion about Venezuela, there was no discussion about U.S. foreign policy or Gaza, and so this indicates that this No Kings movement it has blind spots. And I would submit to you that they're deliberate blind spots because the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, despite the fact that they squabble with each other and they blame each other for all kinds of things, it's not the core issue is that they are not in fundamental disagreement when it comes to the big issues. They vote for the military budgets. They vote to or allow these endless wars to continue, and they don't really help the American people. I mean, look at we have massive homelessness all over the country, and it would really be easy to fix that by just building a bunch of affordable housing. I was and I'll be talking about this some more, but I met I met some Russian people. And it turns out that they had, this was during Soviet Union times, they had a massive housing shortage because they were trying to industrialize and they were taking people out of the farms and bringing them into the cities to get them working in factories. But there's no housing for them. So what they did was they would actually give away, they would give you a house. You'd have to wait 10 or 15 years to get your house. But you think about it this way. If you buy a house from a bank in the United States, you put down, let's say, 10 or 20% of the value of that house. The bank owns 80% of the house. So you are paying essentially rent to the bank for the next 30 years. You don't own your house. And if you stop paying the rent to the bank, they can take your house back, even though you have some equity in it. You don't own that house. But in Russia, if you could live in an apartment, there was what do you call it? Like rent would be no more than 10% of your income. Now, I'm not saying these are beautiful, but it was a house. You had a place to live. You were not living on the street the way you see this disgrace that is going on in cities all over the United States. Why can't we just build a bunch of affordable housing? And so that's where critical thinking comes in. Why do we have this problem? What is going on here? So that's another aspect I want to bring to your attention, that there's nowhere near enough critical thinking going on. Why do we have these endless wars? Why are the budget deficits so high? Why does the military get so much money? And why is there always money for sending weapons to Ukraine or wherever, or sending weapons to Israel to bomb Gaza with? But there's no money for. They're concerned about whether they're going to be able to pay for food stamps for people. So I saw a report: 42 million people are in danger of not getting subsidies just to buy food. But we got money to buy missiles, we got money to buy bombs, but we don't have money for food. So people need to kind of make connections between these things. That's where critical thinking comes in. And the third of the letters, it's I-C-E, introspection, critical thinking, and the last one is empathy. And empathy is the ability to put oneself in another person's shoes, or to put, or from a geopolitical point of view, to look at things from another country's point of view. So probably the best example, the most recent example of this, is with China saying they are no longer going to supply rare earth metals and rare earth minerals to the United States. They're severely restricting them. And the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, said, how did this possibly have come? Why would they do that to us? So he doesn't put himself into the shoes of China, which has been threatened and sanctioned and criticized and had all kinds of problems foisted on it for decades. And finally, and as I pointed out in another video, the United States has been surrounding China with military bases. They have troops in Taiwan, and people say, well, but that's fine. Taiwan, is Taiwan. Well, the United States actually agreed that Taiwan is part of China, and the United States has no business messing around inside of Taiwan. So you'd think that if the United States ruling classes, the political class, had any empathy for China, they'd say, yeah, we did make that agreement. Maybe we can understand why China might be a little bit miffed if we are putting troops in this province and encouraging the people to to rebel and be independent of China, because when the Civil War ended in 1949, because quote unquote ended, it's still technically still going on. With the Kuomintang fleeing the mainland and going to Taiwan, that conflict has never been resolved, and the United States keeps inserting itself into this conflict. And finally, China says, you know what? We've had it. No more rare earths. You use them to build your weapons. You're using your weapons to hurt us, and we're not going to support that anymore. So if we had any degree of empathy, we would understand this, and we would get along. Our international relations would be far, far better. Another example, of course, is in Ukraine, where the United States staged a coup in 2014 after undermining democratic processes in Ukraine for decades. And when Russia finally said, you're building up a military in Ukraine to eventually stage war against us. You're attacking your own people who resisted this coup, and they're begging us for protection. And when the United States goes into Libya or Yugoslavia on false pretenses, we use the excuse it's responsibility to protect. But when Russia actually sees Russian-speaking ethnic Russians being attacked inside of Ukraine because of a government that we installed by a coup, the United States says, oh, how could Russia possibly do that? You see, this is lack of empathy. We simply cannot put ourselves in Russia's shoes or in the shoes of all the other countries that we view as adversaries. So we really need to get our heads around these three concepts of introspection. The American people have to look at themselves and see what we've actually got here as a country. When sometimes you talk about the Native Americans or slavery, and they say, oh, but that happened a long time ago. They don't ask, what is the manifestation of that now? Is the fact that the prison population of the United States is overwhelmingly African American because they've been malignantly neglected for decades and had never really been treated fairly, even after they were freed from slavery? Does that have anything to do with it? And the Native Americans have been treated terribly. If you go to other countries, let's say I live in Thailand, and there are a lot of what are called hill tribes. There are these very small ethnic groups, and these people they have their life. They're just living their lives, and in fact, some of them they were dealing drugs. At the CIA was basically saying, hey, why don't you deal drugs, and that'll be a way for you to make some money. And the Thai government said, you know what, this is not going to work for our country. Why don't you grow coffee or do something that is more useful? And um, the point being that the Thai government had a. I'm not saying it's perfect. There's no country that's perfect, but they at least they didn't just kill them all. The way the United States does, or in Russia, you have like 100 ethnic groups. Many of them have their own languages, and the Russian Empire, even though it was an empire and wasn't always the nicest empire, they didn't just wholesale genocide people the way the United States did. And yet we are always demonizing these other countries. This shows an example of lack of introspection. How can we as a country improve? How can any of us improve unless we are introspective? Look at yourself. What am I doing? What am I doing? How can I improve? How can I create better relationships with people? Those are the kinds of questions that go along with introspection. Critical thinking is where you can tell the difference between right and wrong and good and bad. And empathy is putting yourself in the shoes of other people so that you can appreciate where they're coming from, and that way you can create a consensus agreement and most important, harmony with other people rather than conflict. So that's what I have to say about this idea of ICE, which is a militaristic organization which is going around, being at best um, controversial, and at worst, causing a lot of trouble and harming a lot of people. From the reports I get is that a lot of people have been treated extremely unfairly and frankly brutally. So that's one form of ICE, and the other form of ICE is introspection, critical thinking, and empathy. So thanks again for listening. If you'd like to support my channel, please. And you don't even have to. You don't have to give me money. Just I mean that would be helpful. But if you can just give a like or make a comment, and share it with other people, because I think some of the things that I'm talking about are things that nobody else is talking about. Nobody is talking about, introspection, critical thinking, and empathy as these are national. We talk about financial deficits. We have an intellectual and emotional deficit in the United States, in the rest of the Western world. I mean, it's a human problem, but it's a really serious problem here in the United States. So that's why I bring these kinds of topics up. So thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next time.